Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. And today we're returning to uh, chapter 4 of book 10. And he said he's discussion pleasure. Last chapter, he kind of said we wrapped up things, but then he goes, interesting. He says, last chapter, he kind of ends, like we say right here, like he says, let this be an adequate statement then of what is said about pleasure and pain, right? Now he continues. He goes, okay, but what sort of thing pleasure is would become more manifest to those who take it up from the beginning. So a new discussion. It starts up a whole new discussion of we have to whole new beginning of discussion of pleasure. For the act of seeing seems to be complete at any given moment. Seeing is not deficient in anything that could subsequently come into being, so as to complete its form. So it's not part of something that comes into being. So seeing is complete at any given moment. So you see it is done. It's not something that it will become something else, right? Well, okay, I understand that maybe it does in the sense that maybe you see something and the idea comes from it, but that's not part of the seeing. Okay, the seeing is that may be some other process, right? So coming into being, so it is complete in its form. And pleasure too seems to be a thing of this sort, for it is something whole. No one could at any given moment experience a pleasure whose form will be complete, provided the pleasure lasts longer. Provided, in other words, no one could at a given moment experience a pleasure whose form will be completed, provided the pleasure lasts longer. In other words, more pleasure, different pleasure. Hence, pleasure is not emotion either. So it's not emotion either. For every motion occurs in time and is bound up with some end. So the idea of emotion is bound up in time. Now, this time and motion seems to be connected to this, and that it is bound up with an end. For example, the building of a house. Um, Here, with Burnett manuscript, the building of the house, Okidama, rather than the art of house building, Opadakni, on the grounds that the manuscript reading, the manuscript reading is due to the fact that Kai and, which disappeared from all manuscripts but one, and we do not want the art here, but the process. Burnett argues, right? This is from Burnett. In other words, we're not talking about the art; we're talking about the process of the house building. So therefore, okay. So, for example, for every motion and time built up in time, the house building, right? It and is complete when it accomplishes the thing it which what it aims at, either in the whole of the time in question, or at that moment of completion. In other words, you build the house. In other words, it's in process towards it or the act of it completed. But you're building a house. The house is being built. House is the end, right? Um, but all motions considered in their parts and at any moment are incomplete and differ in form from the whole and from one another. So therefore, in every motion itself, the motion in parts, they're parts of the motive being done. And at any moment of it, in other words, if you look at the motion, the parts of the motion versus the time, the frame, at moment of that motion of uh, uh, um, uh, from one another, each other part, right? Each other moment, right? Each other form, the moment of it, or every part of it, right? The putting together of the stones is different from the fluting of the pillar. And these are distinct from the construction of the temple, right? Every function is like he says, the putting together the stones is different from the creation of every part of the thing has different, building the temple, every part of what is being done has a specific way of doing it. And a thing that is being done, it differs from the other thing that's being done, right? So it's interesting, he says, that we can understand that all motions considered as a whole, we can say that but then the parts of it, when you look at it from the micro thing, there's going to be, the things that make up or constitute the whole may have may differ from one another, right? In fact, the construction of the temple is complete, for it lacks nothing with the view to the task proposed. But the construction of the foundation and of the triglyph are in triglyph. Now, the term from the Doric architecture, triglyph is the three grooved tablets placed at equal distance from the frieze. Right. This is the decorative detail, in short, that would presumably be among the last stages of construction, as distinguished from the foundation, right? So therefore, the two things, the beginning and the last, right? The foundation is the first, and the triglyph are the last, are incomplete, but each are but a part, right? They differ then from in form, and it is not possible to find a motion that is complete in its form in any given moment, but if ever, only in the whole time involved. So therefore, it's from the whole time that the building of the house is complete. Then that every stage is kind of okay, and it's a part of its latter things being done. It's not complete in itself in that sense. So that we find an emotion that is complete in its form at any given moment. It's not possible that it's done at that moment in the action. It's only when the whole, only in terms of the whole, right? Similarly, in the case of walking and the rest of the motions, right? So therefore, it's not complete. It's walking. You're walking towards something. It's walking towards the end. For if locomotion is motion from somewhere to somewhere, there are differences in point from point from belonging to locomotion too, right? Different things of flying, walking, jumping, and the sort of things. In other words, there's different types of locomotion: flying, walking, jumping, and that sort of things. And not only is this the case, but there are differences in point of form, even in walking itself. The place one starts from and heads towards are not the same in the case of the whole race course, the race track, and one of its parts, and one of its parts, or in this or that part of it. Nor is traversing this line here the same as traversing that one there. For not only does one cross a line, but a line that is also in a given place. This line being a different place than that one. What concerns motion has been spoken of precisely elsewhere, right? Again, here's Physics Books 3, the question of motion in Physics Books 3, right? But it does seem that it is not complete at any given moment. In other words, motion is not. In other words, motion is not, at any moment of motion, it's not complete. It's only in the whole it's complete. He says. Rather, there are many incomplete motions that also differ in form. Right, different incomplete motions that differ in form, and in fact, the point of which and towards which one moves constitutes the form of the motion, right? What are you doing? How, in other words, the from which, and towards which one moves constitutes the form, eidos, of the motion. But of pleasure, the form is complete at any given moment. So therefore, distinction from motion Motion is, it varies, the point from point to point. But pleasure is complete at any given moment. It is clear, then, that pleasure and motion would be different from each other. Pleasure being something that is both a whole and complete. Interesting. In other words, it's in other words, it doesn't matter even if it continues, it's still the same thing. It is what it is, in that sense. Where it's not. In other words, it is a whole and it's complete. That once you, even in the moment of that even at that moment of that is it's pleasure. This would seem to be the case also from the fact that it is not possible to be in motion except over time, whereas it is possible to feel pleasure for what resides in the right now. In other words, in the right now, there's no motion. Motion is only in time, right? He seems to be saying. But pleasure, there is a in the right now. In the case of, in other words, for what resides in the right now, in the case of pleasure, is something whole. And from these considerations, it is clear, too, that when people say that pleasure is motion or the process of coming into being, they do not speak beautifully. They don't speak this is correctly, maybe, but no, but I think beautifully, nobly, correctly, colon. They don't speak with it's finely. They're not, it's not correct. It's not beautiful. Um, uh, for these motions or processes are not spoken of in the case of all things. For these motions or processes are not spoken of in the case of all things, but only in the case of things that are parts and not wholes. So therefore, this idea of for these motions or processes are not spoken of all in the case of all things, but only in the case of things that are parts and not wholes. There is no coming into being of the act of seeing, of a mathematical point, or of a numerical unit. And of none of these is there any motion or coming into being. So therefore, what he's saying, oh, it's interesting. He's saying that now he says this: there is no coming to being in the act of seeing. The act of seeing. When you see something, perception in a sense, or of the mathematical point, or of the unit mathematical unit. None of these things is there motion or coming being. So neither is there in the case of pleasure, for it is something whole. So therefore, as the mathematical thing is a whole, in other words, these things are not. They're just what he says here that they're wholes in themselves, right? He seems to suggest here that and the act of seeing, the mathematical point, the numerical unit, none of these is there any motion or coming into being. They're not. It's not. They're just there. They're there. They're holes in themselves. They seem to suggest, and therefore this is true case of pleasure. So neither is there in the case of pleasure, right? For it is something whole. Every sense perception is active in relation to the thing perceived, and it is active in a complete way when it is in a good condition, with the view to the noblest of things subject to sense perception, the most beautiful things, the thing of things, the noblest, the best, the noblest of things subject to sense perception. For such especially seems to be complete activity, right? The most highest things, most beautiful, noblest things of sense, these are the beautiful, most beautiful things, right? And let it make no difference whether one says that the perception itself is active, or that in which it resides is the person who's doing it is active. Resides is so. So it makes no difference, especially the subject noblest in the sense of perception. Quote, for such especially seems to be a complete activity, right? Semicolon. And let us make no difference whether it says the perception itself is active or that it resides in that which it resides in is active, right? Is so. In each particular case, now this the reading of the manuscript defended by Gautier and Jotif, right? Most modern editors follows by a reading erroneously attributed to pseudo Alexander of Aspasia, according to Gautier, which would render the trans as regard each sense of perception. Then no, okay, so therefore he's going to stop that. In each particular case, then the activity that then that activity is best that belongs to what is in the best condition, which with a view to the most excellent of things falling under its preview, semicolon. So in each particular case, what what the that activity is best. So that activity in question is best. That belongs to what is the best condition with which with a view to the most excellent of things falling under its preview. And this would be what is most complete, right? Telos, right? It's ending, right? And most pleasant. So therefore, this is what is. In other words, this is he puts it in in other words, that activity is best. That belongs to what is the best condition with a view to the most excellent of things falling under its preview. And this is the most complete and the most pleasant. For in the case of every sense perception, and similarly with similarly also with thinking and contemplation, there exists a corresponding pleasure. So therefore, every sense and pleasure, as well as thinking, there is a corresponding pleasure. But the most complete perception is most pleasant, and the most complete perception is the one belonging to what is in a good condition and directed towards what is the most serious, budios thing among the things in the purview. In other words, the most serious of the things. In other words, this pleasure is stronger, better. This is the more complete in that sense, right? This is the most complete perception. Is the most pleasant, more pleasant. There can be more pleasure. Pleasure can be more or less, right? He seems to say. Therefore, these noble things bring the most pleasant, the serious things. In other words, the most complete perception of what belongs to what is good condition, and direct what is the person in the good condition and directed towards what is the most serious of things in its preview. This is the best, most pleasant. Pleasure also completes the related activity, relevant activity, relevant. So it completes. It is the end. It is tied to the end of it, right? But pleasure does not complete it in the same manner as do the things perceived. And this, in other words, but pleasure does not. In other words, pleasure completes the relevant activity, right? But pleasure does not complete it in the same manner as do the things perceived and sense perception when they are of serious worth. Just as health and the physician are not in similar ways the cause of one's being healthy either. In other words, they're not. In other words, he's saying that just as health and the physician are not in a similar ways being healthy either. In other words, health. If you're healthy because you're healthy, okay, that's how it should be. Whereas your physician makes you healthy, right? Um, this is not similar ways; they're different. So therefore, what is he saying here is that pleasure does not complete in the same manner as do things perceived and sense perceptions do. Let's flush this out some more. But that pleasures arise in the case of each sense perception is clear. So it's not, in other words, it's clear that each sense perception, For we assert that things seen and things heard are pleasant. It is clear, too, that this is especially so whenever the perception is most excellent and is active in relation to something of this sort. So let's repeat this. It says, it is clear too that especially so whenever perception is the most excellent and is active in relation to something of the same sort. When both the thing perceived and what is and that which perceives are of this most excellent sort, there will always be pleasure. When that is something that will act as well as something that will be acted on are pleasant. So therefore, let's leave this thing for a second. Let's go. In other words, he's saying that there's a connection, that the higher thing or the better thing, the best thing, a high excellent is the best one. Tied to, in other words, it is clear too that especially so when perception is most excellent and is active in a relation to something of the same sort. When both the thing perceived and that which perceives are of this most excellent sort, there will be pleasure. When that is something that will act as well as something that will be acted on are pleasant. So therefore, this condition is that they will be something that will act and acted on. The pleasure completes the activity, not in the manner of a characteristic that is already inherent in it, but as a certain end that supervenes on it. So therefore, it's not inherent. In other words, it's the pleasure it completes the activity, but not because it's part of it's inherent to the activity, but rather he says that it supervenes, it puts itself on top of it. As for example, the bloom of youth supervenes, though supervenes goes on top of, right? You know, those in the prime of life. For so long, then, as both the intelligible or perceptible thing, for so long, then, as both the intelligible and perceptible thing, and that which forms a judgment or contemplates are such as they ought to be, there will be pleasure in that activity. So, therefore, it is both as the intelligible or perceptible thing are, that they see that these things are, and that the judgment or the contemplation of such are as they ought to be, then there will be pleasure in the activity. For when both that which is acted on and that which acts remains what they are and have the same relation to each other, the same naturally arises. So therefore, this is a very important point here. He says that there's a connection. There's like almost a correlation here going on here. For when both that which is acted on and that which acts remain as they are and have the same relation to each other, then the same thing will naturally arise. And this is that I'm perception. In other words, I'm in my condition. I'm my contemplation and my contemplation or my perception. In other words, my judgment and conception are as they ought to be, and the sense I what I perceive or intelligence and think upon that thing think about this is the both the intelligible or perceptible things that I can know, something I can know, something I know, and there's something I can sense. I can know intelligible, something can know, or I can sense, and that my judgment or contemplation are there ought to be, right? That these are interconnected, and therefore the pleasure will be that there will be pleasure in this activity. How is it then that no one feels pleasure continuously? So objection: why does no one feel pleasure, or does one grow weary? For nothing characteristically human has the capacity to engage in continuous activity. In other words, in other words, it's a very important point that he says nothing human can have the capacity for internal process. The law of diminishing marginal returns, right? There's limits, right? Nothing characteristic human has the capacity to engage in continuous activity. Pleasure too, then pleasure too, then does not arise continuously, since it follows the activity. So that in other words, it's tied to the action. He's saying pleasure is not continuous; it is tied to follows the activity. And some things, because they are novel, do give delight, but later on they do not do so much. They, in other words, there are some things because they are novel, new, right, do give delight, but later on they do not do so as much, and for the same reason. In other words, there's limits. There's something new. I get delight of something new, but I'm used to it. I don't. It's no longer a new anymore. It's not something I experience. So I don't get the same level. There's limits. There's diminishing, right? For at the first, for at our first thinking is roused and active to the utmost degree regarding them, as is the case with sight. When people stare at something, but subsequently the activity involved is not such intensity, but instead becomes relaxed. Hence, the pleasure involved too is dimmed in that sense. In other words, the sense of the thing. If it's new, it's like, oh, and the pleasure you get from it. But then I see it again. It's relaxed, and that's or dimmed. As the intensity of the look of the thing of the act, the thing is reduced. Therefore, the intensity of the pleasure is the pleasure too involved is dimmed, right? But someone might suppose that all strive for pleasure because all also aim at being alive. So, okay, someone might suppose that all strive for pleasure because all aim at being alive. Living is a certain activity, and each engages in an activity concerned with and by the means of those things he is especially fond of. The musical person, for example, engages by means of hearing and in an activity concerning with melodies. The lover of learning engages by means of thinking in the activity concerned with the objects of contemplation, and so on with the rest. So there are different types of activities, different types of doing, different music, okay, hearing, the thinker and thinking, and then some like other people, right? Pleasure also completes the activity, as indeed it does in being alive, right? Living itself has a kind of pleasure, right? Which people long for. It is reasonable then that they aim also at pleasure, since it completes for each what it is to be alive, which is a choice-worthy thing. So therefore there is kind of a sense that living gives a pleasure, a pleasure. Now, Aristotle says this is, simply living is a sweet thing, right? It is something sweet, as long as it's not unbearable, right? That's the point. It's a sweet thing as long as it's not too hard to bear. Right? This is something he says in the Politics. So pleasure is also completes an activity, completes the activities, as indeed it does in being alive, which people long for. Right? It is reasonable then that they aim also at pleasure, since it completes for what it is to be alive, which is a choice-worthy thing. As to whether we choose to live on account of the pleasures involved or choose the pleasures on account of our being alive, let that be dismissed at the present. We're not going to do this question. We're not going to do this at the moment. For these things appear to be yoked together and do not admit of separation. Without activity, pleasure does not arise, and pleasure completes every activity. So therefore, there's this idea that you can't separate, you can't divide being, doing, and pleasure. You can't separate the activity, this activity, and the completion of the activity and pleasure. So this question of whether we choose to be alive because of pleasure, or we choose pleasure, in other words, on account of our being alive. In other words, we choose pleasure on account of us being alive. Something that's yoked together. It's inseparable in that sense. We have to put this aside. We can't answer this question because we don't know how it is not being. In other words, we don't know not being. And it's not a possible. It's not something that we can know in that sense, and therefore we can't answer that question. So let us stop here. If you have any comments or questions, please put them below, and I will respond to them when I see them. If you have, if you liked it, please, if you liked the video, please hit the like button. Hit the thumbs up. Why? Because it helps the get more attention to the site, and people will start seeing it. If you're liked it again, share it. Share it on your social media. Share it out. Share it with your friends. Bring attention to it. Help the site grow. If you've not subscribed, please subscribe. If you know, if you are subscribed, please bring the site to the attention of others, and if not, so that they can go check out, go to the beginning and watch the whole series of the ethics, or they go to any other of the playlists out there, and encourage them to subscribe, because as we grow the channel, I'm trying to get to limit. I'll try to get more attention to this. Another thing we can do is, if you want to follow me on social media, you can follow the links below. If you want to know more about me as an academic and check out my stuff as a scholar, you can and see my scholarship and things like that. You can go check out the academic social media below the social media links. Or, and if you want to help me to do what I do here by contributing, you can do so through the links to Patreon or Subscribestar. Or if you, because right now I don't have the online function of Amazon to kind of donate. Oh, here's the hat with the money. Please help the philosopher, man. We'll work for, we'll do this for food. Um, okay. Another thing you can do is, well, you can buy one of the books. The books are listed, but my currently available books are listed below. You can do so through your local bookstore, or order through your local bookseller, or you can order it online through an online bookseller like Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Libris, A&E, whatever site you guys you think you know about and use and trust. And then last but not least, you can go to the publishers themselves. Well, that's it. Next time we look at chapter 5. So take care. See you next time. Bye-bye.